Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Mary Alessi. She's a brief educator, author, TEDx, and keynote speaker. And we'll learn from her about how she chose healing over sadness after her husband unexpectedly passed away from a brain aneurysm. And then she dedicated her life to allowing healing and creating happiness for her young family. So we'll learn from her how she choose healing over sadness, turned her loss into a legacy, and now helps others bring lightness into grief. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ. I'm so excited to be here.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Mary. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure
Thank you.
Not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about grief, we'll talk about healing, and we'll talk about how you tackled it all. So we'll talk about all this. But before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Ooh, how long have you got? 3 hours, right? Just kidding. My background, originally I'm from Austria. I have moved to Australia in 2004, and only 10 months later, I met my beautiful husband in 2005. And another 10 months later, we got married. If anybody would have told me that before, I would have thought, there's no way. If he's Mr. Right, he's still Mr. Right in 3 to 5 years. But when I met Rob, I just knew. And everybody tells you that, when you know, you know. I really experienced that with Rob, and it was beautiful. So we got married in 2006. We had a barefoot wedding on the beach, beautiful. 2 years and 4 years later, we had our 2 sons, Flynn and Jed. And our life was just picture perfect, literally picture perfect. We were that couple, still madly in love after 12 years of marriage, and everybody looked up to us, and the boys were super happy. We spent a lot of time on the beach. And then one day in June 2018, Rob went on a business trip and never came home. He died very unexpectedly from a brain aneurysm. So it was instant, and the boys were 10 and 8 at the time. So I don't know where you would like to take me this story. Do you want me to continue what I did with it? Or this is my story in a nutshell, how I then started working in the space of grief. So that's my background.
Absolutely. So how did you build or rebuild your life after that? It is not easy. Grief, pulls everyone towards it, and people can drown in grief, and it is not easy to deal with that. I want to understand that part of your story for the audience, for all those people who are having to deal with grief in different forms, in different ways in their own lives. They can learn from your life, how you built it there and started helping others. That is the story I want for the audience.
Yeah, awesome. I'd love to share that. So the number one thing, because you said it's not easy, I did not choose to look at it from that perspective ever. I refused to look at my life or the boys' lives from the perspective of this is so hard, or this wasn't easy. I didn't have time or the luxury to look at it from that perspective. I looked at it from a perspective that came out of a conversation that Rob and I had about 3 years prior to his passing. And I'm going to share it with you in a nutshell because it's such a beautiful, heartwarming story. Rob came home late from work one day, and he called me on the way home. He said, "Babe, I'm going to be 2 hours late. There was an accident on Heathcote Road. It's a road that goes one way for like almost 30 kilometers through the national park. So there's no possibility for a detour." So it took him over 2 hours in peak hour traffic to go all the way around out of the national park and a different way home. And that night we learned that somebody had passed away in a front-on accident with a truck, and his wife was at home waiting for him with their 16-month-old daughter, his firstborn. And when you think of it from an outside perspective, when your husband calls you, he's like, "Babe, I'm home late from work." You're waiting there with the boys, and they want to say goodnight to Dad, and it's an inconvenience, right? For all the families, it's an inconvenience. But for one family, it meant that the husband never came home. And that triggered us to have that what if conversation that night. We sat on our bed with lots of tears and laughter and connection and love. There was so much love in that room. And it is a confronting question, but we talked about the what would you do if that happened to us? And the nutshell outcome of that conversation was, I would want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys. That's what we wanted for each other, because that's what love is. So when I received that phone call telling me from a sergeant from the coroner's office, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband deceased in a hotel room in Perth this morning, the number one thing I had in my head when I had to share the news with our 10 and 8-year-old sons was just that sentence. I want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys. And that became my lighthouse in my darkest hour. That became my everything, my go-to, my filter. I never thought of it as like, oh, I'm a sole parent now. Oh, this is so hard, or this is so sad. I didn't have time for that. My whole focus went on, how can I create the happiest life possible for the boys and myself? Because that's what love is. That's what our whole relationship was built on. And that's what I want to carry forward as Rob's love legacy for our family.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mary. So, a lot of people do not see it that way. They have a very different understanding of grief, and look at grief very differently. In fact, there are some
Yeah.
common myths around grief also. If you can share some
Yeah.
common myths that people have around grief, so that the audience can understand it better, and deal with grief in their own way, against this
Yeah.
whole better understanding from you.
Yeah. I want to simplify it just because we have such short amount of time here today. Grief needs space to heal. It doesn't need time. It doesn't need, people always say, oh, time heals all wounds. Well, it doesn't just heal grief just because time passes. It takes a dedication. It takes a decision that you want to heal. And it also takes the time that you take and create to create that space for the healing to happen. So there needs to be an intention with that time and space. It doesn't just happen automatically. Time doesn't heal all wounds. We do, our decision does. And with that, I know that people just need that space for the healing, but we as a Western society are not great in holding that space for people. And that's what we need to learn. There are cultures that do grief a lot more beautiful and honoring the loved ones. And I know for a fact that the Indian culture, for example, does it a lot better than us. And the Mexican culture, the Japanese culture, there are all these elements of spending time with the body. Even when somebody dies, we don't allow that in our society. When somebody dies, the body is taken away as soon as possible, put into a mortuary till a funeral is arranged. I'm sorry to be so blunt here with that, but I think that's where we already go wrong. We need time to process what actually happened, because in our case, it was so surreal. Rob was 45. He was so young. He was in the prime of his life, completely unexpected. There was no warning for that at all. So I think the number one thing is for us to learn to hold space for someone. And what we need for our grief is to be in community with somebody who can hold space for you. In our society, it's very much my condolences, and that's where you draw the line. I don't think my condolences helps you heal at all. It actually excludes you further from everything that you have loved and known before. So we need to make sure that we are more inclusive and building community around that person, strengthen them. We are pretty good in organizing food rosters and, making sure that the person is fed for a while, but that's pretty much it. There's no roster for emotional support. There's no roster as in, hey, let's take her boys out and go and kick a ball with them, or take them to the beach so she gets a little bit of time out. She as in the mom, So there's not a lot around that. And I think if we can do that, if we can offer that to people to make it a more, it takes a village to raise a child. And when you just lose your second parent, your partner, your life partner, then all of a sudden you're all on your own raising those children. And as I said, I never had time to think about that. I never thought of it, oh, I'm so alone in this now, nobody's helping me. My focus was just on the boys and creating happiness. I didn't have time to think about whether it was hard, whether I was alone in this. I just focused on what I knew I can do rather than what I can't do or don't have anymore. And I think we can do better. As a community, we can do better. We can rally around them and hold them with love and create a space where they're all taken care of and all nurtured and looked after.
Absolutely, absolutely. You talked about, different cultures, Indian culture, Mexican culture, and other
Yeah.
cultures also, Western culture around grief. Now, these are own cultures in their own way they have developed. It is difficult to change a culture. But within the Western society also, if we look at it, be that whatever culture it is at present, and how there can be changes. But in terms of the present situation, what would you advise, or what you advise to others in the present situation to tackle their grief better? How is it that people, especially in that part of the world, can learn from you whatever is
Yeah.
best within the specific situation at the moment?
Oh, thanks, Ajay. I love that question because it actually starts with something so simple that we all can do right now. And I hope if there's anything you want to take away from today's class, then this is this. We need to change the language that we use around grief. Like, think about what happens when I say my condolences and then I turn my back and leave. It draws a line. It is a separator between you and I. And I prefer saying things like, my heart goes out to you, because that literally, I feel that when I say that. And what it does for me is when I say my heart goes out to you, my heart opens up to you. It creates a space between you and I where a conversation can happen, where healing can happen, where that feeling of I am held in this can happen, that other person can lean in and isn't pushed away with my condolences and we're done. So think about those things that you can say. Then the language, how we speak to ourselves in our head, I have worked with thousands of people in that space, and a lot of them are moms and all of a sudden sole parents, and there is a sentence that I hear a lot is, well, I had to do this for my kids. I got to get up for my kids. I got to get going, and that I got to, that is burden, that is heavy. And I always offer them a tiniest and most beautiful reframe. I said, what if you changed it to I get to? This is all of a sudden, this becomes such a beautiful opportunity. It is a gift. It goes from burden to gift. I got to, I get to. I get to is a gift. I get to be there for my kids. Unfortunately, Rob hasn't got this opportunity anymore. I do. I want to take this lightheartedly. This is such a beautiful gift that I am the chosen parent to be there for my children. And with that mindset, it changes everything, because when you go from burden to gift, it brings lightness into grief. The situation doesn't change, but the mindset and your intention and your attitude towards life changes. So it's all about what can we say, what shouldn't we say, and things like, oh, there's another one, is used all the time in a grief space. Just let me know if you need anything. That's a door closer. Just let me know if you need anything. Nobody who's grieving will let you know when they need anything, because all of a sudden they think, I don't want to be a burden to anyone, and I don't know how to allow help in, because if I allow help in and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore, then I feel more alone than if I just do it on my own anyway. So they are not in a mental or emotional capacity to open up and call people and say, hey, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? They're not in that space. You need to simplify it. And if you really want to help, if you don't say just out of politeness, if you really want to help, you tell them, hey, I'm cooking for you next week. Would you prefer Tuesday or Thursday? Then it's a simple this or that question for them. It's a simple choice. And let's say I say, okay, yeah, Tuesday, please. Then they say, okay, would you prefer something grounding like a lasagna, or would you prefer something lighter like a chicken Caesar salad? Or, just throwing ideas out. It can be anything, but just think of those, give them two options, and not just heavy, light. Just give them two options, because when I was in the thickness of grief at the beginning stages, I could not stomach any heavy food. And let's face it, in our Western culture, when people bring over food, they always bring heavy food. It's always lasagna or pasta or, like some stew, whatever. It's always heavy. But think of that people might need lighter food because they can't stomach it. Does that make sense?
Indeed, I understand
Yeah.
it, Mary, and I'm sure a lot of people do understand it. During difficult times, it is very difficult to have heavy food and much more. I want to, let me ask this
Yeah.
question this way,
Sure.
that people want to help the person who is grieving and genuinely want to, but they are not very expressive. And at that point in time they also are not sure how the other person wants to be helped in that situation, or in that those challenging situation. How do I still come out and offer my help in the best way possible,
Beautiful.
that does not get lost in translation, but also is, is in the way that the grieving person wants to be helped? How do I maintain people, especially in today's time, you see, with so much of social media, less contact, less human connection, these words
Yes.
are becoming much more difficult to come out from our mouth. It is there in their heart, but it's not coming out from our mouths. How do we tackle that?
Well, let's simplify it then. If there are no words coming out, keep it at that. You can literally offer, hey, do you want me to come and just sit with you? Do you know what a gift that is when you can do that for someone? People always feel like they need to fix something. There is nothing to be fixed in grief, but you need that space. Again, it's the space, create the space for healing. And that can be done so beautifully by offering to just be there. And you need to learn to become comfortable with that silence, because only in that silence is the other person then invited to come forward if he or she wants to talk about it. But forcing a conversation, trying to fix it. And the number one rule, please, please do not offer all your death-related stories as a comparison. That's the last thing you can handle when you're grieving your loved one. You don't want to hear about other people who lost their loved ones, because you can hardly come to terms with or carry that your loved one just passed, and then other people come in. It's almost like, I'm going to share that as a comparison so people understand. In our society, a lot of times when a woman is pregnant, everybody comes in and offers the most horrific and horrible birth stories. I don't understand why. Why are we doing that? We're creating more space, more fear for the pregnant person, for the pregnant expecting mama. Like, don't do that. Do not share horrible stories, other stories. People do that in the attempt to make you feel, I understand you because that's what I've experienced. But everyone's grief is just as unique as the person experiencing it. It's the same for birth. It's the same for death. Your story is unique and different. It's got a fingerprint on it that is only your story. So do not come in with comparison. Please leave your comparison at home. Just come in to be there, to hold space. Maybe share stories. That's always something that's so beautiful. Share beautiful stories about the loved one. If you have known that person who died, share beautiful stories about him or her. That's what we always want to hear. People are worried that it might trigger tears. So those are happy tears. It's fine to trigger those. It's absolutely fine to share stories like that. So don't compare. Just be there. It rhymes even. It's perfect. And share stories about the person if you have known the person who died.
Absolutely, Mary. In your journey, what helped you most in that? Was there, was there your own resilience? Was that the talk that you had earlier on with your husband, or was it your children? What are the things you made as something that you can stick to? What can others look for themselves in terms of something concrete that they can hold on to?
Look, I have done a lot of work in the space of mindset beforehand already. I was a mindset coach for over 7 years when Rob died. So that has really helped me. But what has also helped me was, in a bizarre way, my dad died when I was 20. And I had no idea how to handle grief back then. And I knew that I did not want my children to go through the same journey that I had when my dad died. I wanted them to feel supported. I wanted them to feel seen in their grief. I wanted them to be allowed to have happiness in their lives, which our society doesn't offer. It's like, you're grieving, that's sad. You're grieving, that's heavy. No, joy and sadness and grief and tears and everything, it coexists. It's not one or the other. It's not now you're grieving and you have to be sad for the rest of your life. No, now you're grieving, you need more joy than ever. So allow that in. We feel so guilty when we experience joy again, and we shouldn't, because when you see it, so this is the number one thing that helped me the most, switching roles in my mind with Rob's perspective. So when I didn't know an answer, or when I felt guilty, or when I didn't know how to handle something, I would always look at our situation from Rob's perspective, and I always thought, so what would Rob want us to do? And I know for a fact he wanted us to be happy. He wanted us to choose joy over grief at any given stage. And that doesn't negate the grief. The grief is still there. It just invites joy in to sit with the grief as well. So it brings another element in that really lightens the mood. It lightens the load of the heavy grief. So bring joy in, bring happiness in, bring love in. We need so much love in all that space. And there is so much love in the grief journey. If I hadn't loved, I wouldn't be grieving. But they are two different things. A lot of people look at it as in, oh, grief is just the other side of love. No, it's not. Grief is grief, love is love, but they can coexist, and they very often do. So for me, love is a permanent thing, and grief becomes a visitor. It feels quite permanent at the beginning, but it's not. It's a visitor that can come back at certain triggers, at certain events, at certain anniversary dates, but it doesn't have to live with you for the rest of your life. I want to honor Rob by creating happiness and a beautiful life that is worth loving, and not by sitting in my grief for the rest of my life, because I know for a fact that he didn't want me to do that. And I wouldn't have wanted the same for him either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One last question I have for you, Mary, is that you talk about grief. You also talk about that healing is a choice. Many people think about grief and just be in that. When you talk about healing is a choice, how you want people to look at grief and then the healing is a choice part?
Yeah. I think choice is such a big thing in everything, how we create our lives. Like, I learned that concept of two choices, or you have choices, from my husband way before I stepped into the coaching space. So I still hear it in my voice when he just said, two choices, babe. And he always had his cheeky smile when he said that. What do you want to look at? How do you want to look at your life, from which perspective? And I think perspective is such a big thing. So for me, the healing, it really comes to that point, what I said just before, that we often look at grief as that one pot that has the heaviness in there and the sadness. And this is how we honor our people. And we don't. This is not honoring our people. This is actually doing the complete opposite, because when you think of one lesson that grief teaches you more than any event in life, even birth, is how precious life is. That's what we learn the very hard way. As soon as one of our loved ones transitions, passes over, that's when we realize more than ever how precious their life is. And I wish that people would be more aware of that during their lifetime. And I understand it's all part of the human experience. We're not constantly in an absolute bliss state of massive gratitude. I wish we were, but we're not. It's part of the human experience here. So when we look at that and we learn that lesson on such a deep level, how precious a life is, then we need to carry that forward to honor our life that we still have, and our children's lives that they still have, and make that as valuable and as beautiful and rich as we possibly can. So when you look at it from that perspective, life is such a gift. And I feel that no matter what adversity, every adversity carries hidden gifts. And realizing how precious your life is just one of them, and it's a big one.
Wonderful. There is so much to learn about all this from you, Mary. And I'm sure a
Thank
lot
you.
of people would want to connect with you, learn more about all this, about your story from your book. What's the best way from there for them to do so?
I would say my website, mariealessi.com. And also because I have written quite a few different books, my absolute favorite that I always recommend if you want to start with one, even though it's the latest book I've written, I would recommend My Person Died, What Now? Because it really has everything that we talked about today with way more examples than I was able to mention today in it. It is a grief guide with a positive twist, and I've put everything I've learned and grief language into that book. And my sons have co-written a chapter in it from the children's perspective. So it's very, very precious to me.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.